In the previous module, How Long is a Piece of String, we looked at ways to avoid ambiguity creeping into our requirements by avoiding escape clauses, vague terms, open-ended phrases, and the use of the oblique. Hopefully, since Module 9, you have been looking at requirements and asking two critical questions. First, is the requirement verifiable? In other words, is the requirement worded in such a way that the person responsible for executing the requirement can prove to you that they have met the requirement without the need for any interpretations or assumptions as to what was actually intended? The second question, does the requirement pass the delete test? Is the requirement so vague and aspirational that deleting it from your document would have zero impact on the actual work that gets done? Shall minimize leaks? Shall be easy to operate and maintain? These sound nice, but they are also utterly meaningless as far as design requirements are concerned. In Module 10, we continue our efforts against ambiguous requirements by looking at abbreviations and terms. Let's start with abbreviations. We all know that there is no shortage of 3 or 4 letter abbreviations in the world today. Here are some examples of potential ambiguities if we fail to define the abbreviations we are using. Is ABC airborne contaminants, all burner closed, or even the Alberta Building Code? Is AI analog input, asset integrity, or artificial intelligence? Is AC alternating current or atmospheric corrosion? These are just a few starting with the letter A. There are hundreds more, such as VOC, a volatile organic compound, or voice of the customer. Or SLA, is that a service level agreement or a safe landing area for a helicopter? Lots of potential ambiguity. So it is a minimum requirement for your requirements that any abbreviations you use are defined somewhere where the recipient of your requirements can easily find them. Now, some folks do this at the start of the document, others at the end. It doesn't really matter as long as you do it. The only additional piece of advice we have on abbreviations is something we call ANA, avoid inventing new acronyms. No, seriously, your first thought must be to use commonly used or industry standard abbreviations. We have so many of them, there should be absolutely no need for any of you to invent a new one or feel the urge to modify the definition of an existing one. Now, anyone can scan a document, look for abbreviations, and then list them somewhere. It's easy, which is why most of you already do it. Things get more challenging when we need to start defining terms. Due to the nature of our work, we use a vast array of terms, but are we always on the same page when it comes to understanding and interpreting these terms? Let's take a look at a popular term in our industry, safe location. Used in the context of the requirement, all point source emissions shall be located at a safe location. What do you think this means? So what did you think? Is it an emission point that through dispersion and consequence modeling is determined to have negligible risk to personnel, assets, and the environment? Or is it roughly 3 meters away from any permanent platform or building where personnel might be located? We don't know either. Here's another example we see quite often. The injection pump shall be a proven design. Proven, what does that mean? That it worked for 2 months or 2 years? Does it even matter in which service it proved itself over the intended period? We'll use this definition for proven equipment. Equipment of which at least 3 units of a similar type, size, and specific loading have together accumulated a minimum of 24,000 hours of comparable satisfactory service. This is not perfect, but much better. So which terms need defining? To answer this question, we need to define 2 terms that are interlinked. The first is tacit knowledge. This is the knowledge that is difficult to write down, that you gain through personal experience. Some requirements are loaded with tacit knowledge, such as what we actually mean by the terms proven or safe. The second term is that of reasonable person. When authoring requirements, we must use our engineering judgment when assuming the experience level of the person responsible for actually executing the requirements. Whilst we do not assume that a baker will be welding piping on our projects, we also must not assume that the person will have the same depth of tacit knowledge that you and I have acquired. We need to picture a reasonable person and, where necessary, make tacit knowledge explicit by providing suitable definitions for the terms we are using. Finding the sweet spot between defining every term versus defining no terms requires a bit of effort, which might explain why many projects skip this step. However, in order to avoid ambiguity, frustration, inefficiencies, and possibly disappointments on projects, it is important that we provide definitions for terms where even a reasonable person needs help. Remember, most terms out there probably already have a good definition that you can reuse. So, as with abbreviations, our instinct should be to check for what's already out there and then reuse to the max. One final point. When using defined terms, how can we trigger the reader of our requirements of the fact that we have defined a specific term for them to use? Let's return to this requirement. One approach is to capitalize the first letter of the words in the term that has been defined. The other approach is to put the entire word in capital letters. When using phrases, we've seen this approach used by folks outside of oil and gas, and it's another elegant way of prompting the reader that the term has been formally defined. But the most important thing to remember is to choose one approach and then use it consistently across your set of documents. A quick recap. Every good document that contains requirements must have a list of defined terms and abbreviations. By making tacit knowledge explicit, we make it possible for a reasonable person to deliver what we need and expect without them having to make assumptions or fire off a series of clarifications. Defining the right terms requires judgment and effort, but that's no excuse for avoiding it. Remember, nearly every term and abbreviation has probably already been defined, so reuse is your friend.